Today is a solemn and significant day. With today's guilty plea, Mr. Mangione has accepted full responsibility for the death of Brian Thompson.
Breaking news out of federal court in Manhattan. Accused assassin Luigi Mangione enters guilty pleas to charges related to the murder of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
This was not a spontaneous act of violence. It was deliberate, calculated, and premeditated.
The crime that shocked the nation and robbed a family of a husband
On
and
Friday,
father.
August 14th, 2026, inside a federal courtroom in Lower Manhattan, 28-year-old Luigi Mangione stood before U.S. District Judge Margaret Garnett and said, in his own words, that he hunted down and killed a man and that he knew exactly what he was doing when he did it. It is the moment that changes the entire trajectory of one of the most polarizing criminal cases in modern American history, the assassination of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. To understand how big this moment really is, rewind to December 4th, 2024. Thompson, 50 years old, a husband and father of two, was walking toward the Hilton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan for UnitedHealth Group's annual investor conference when a masked gunman stepped out and shot him in the back on a public sidewalk in broad daylight while ordinary New Yorkers walked past on their way to work. The shooter disappeared into Central Park, triggering a 5-day nationwide manhunt that ended more than 200 miles away at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania,
After the murder, that work paid off in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where an alert member of the public recognized Mangione and local police took him into custody. That was not simply a lucky break. It was the culmination of 5 days of relentless investigative work that gave the public the information it needed to recognize the suspect and gave our law enforcement partners what they needed to act. This case began with the worst kind of violence on our streets. It was answered by the very best of the New York City Police Department. To every member of the NYPD who played a role in this investigation, you should be enormously proud for bringing us to this day.
An employee recognized the face from the news and called it in. Getting there took the NYPD combing through thousands of hours of surveillance footage, chasing down hundreds of tips, and pairing facial recognition technology with old-fashioned shoe leather police work, releasing a clear image of their suspect to the public just 5 days after the murder.
To recognize the extraordinary police work that brought us here. From the moment that Mr. Thompson was assassinated on the morning of December 4th, the NYPD mobilize an enormous investigative effort. Our detectives combed through thousands of hours of surveillance video, followed up on hundreds of tips, and worked through an extraordinary volume of forensic and digital evidence. They used some of the most sophisticated technology available to law enforcement, and they paired it with the kind of painstaking, old-fashioned detective work that has defined the New York City Police Department for generations, interviewing witnesses, canvassing neighborhoods, retracing the suspect's movements, and pursuing every viable lead. Most importantly, they developed a clear image of the man we were looking for and got that image out to the public and to law enforcement agencies across this country 5 days after the murder.
The exact break that ultimately led to that call from Altoona. That was Luigi Mangione, an Ivy League graduate from a prominent Baltimore family with no criminal record, who instantly became one of the most talked about defendants in the country. In the 20 months since, he has become a strange kind of American celebrity, with strangers funding his legal defense, selling merchandise stamped with his face, and flooding social media, defending him as a symbol of frustration with an industry millions of Americans feel has failed them. Prosecutors initially pursued the death penalty at the direction of the Attorney General, but earlier this year, a federal judge struck those charges down, narrowing the case to the 2 counts Mangione ultimately admitted to on Friday. Fast forward to this week. For the first time since the murder, Brian Thompson's family walked into a courtroom to face the man accused of killing him. His widow, Paulette Thompson, and his mother sat in the front row as Mangione was led in, feet shackled, hands cuffed behind his back.
Who was just feet away from Luigi Mangione when he pleaded guilty. Elizabeth, you were in the courtroom. Take us inside and take it from the very top about what you saw. I read online that Luigi Mangione came into the courtroom and he was not handcuffed.
No, Anjanette, he was not handcuffed. Actually, it's funny enough that you say that, because when he first came inside the courtroom, his hands were actually behind his back. So I at first assumed he was handcuffed from the back, but then as he's kind of approaching the defense's table, we see that that's not the case. But we do believe that he was shackled around his feet, especially given
Dressed in tan prison clothing with a plain white t-shirt underneath, there was no plea deal on the table. No agreement, no concessions, nothing negotiated away. Mangion's own attorneys told the judge he was prepared to plead guilty to the entire federal indictment, which meant,
in an effort to advance their beliefs, will be prosecuted, convicted, and put in jail. Today, the Southern District of New York, together with our law enforcement partners, writes the final chapter of Mangione's federal prosecution. Now, he stands convicted in federal court and faces life in prison. One other point that's important to note. While the defendant pled guilty, our office does not have a plea agreement with him. Instead, he pled open, which means he pled guilty to all pending counts.
Prosecutors remained completely free to push for the harshest sentence the law allows. Judge Garnett walked him through a long list of questions to confirm he understood exactly what he was giving up: his right to a trial, his right to remain silent, his right to force the government to prove its case. He answered clearly until the judge asked whether he had used any drugs or alcohol recently, and he paused before admitting he had taken a sleeping pill 2 days earlier.
And then the judge required Luigi Mangione to allocute and say what he did.
And it was interesting, Anjanette, because, as the judge is reading off just, these questions on whether or not he's of sound mind, there was this moment where he's answering yes repeatedly, but then he's asked whether or not he recently had drugs or alcohol. And he takes kind of a moment. He looks at both of the Agnipolos who are sitting right beside each other, and then he kind of blurts out that he had taken sleeping pills about
The judge found him fully competent anyway and asked him to describe, in his own words, what he did. What followed was one of the most chilling confessions on record in a case that has obsessed the country for almost 2 years. Mangione spoke so quickly at times that the judge had to stop him and ask him to slow down. He explained that after years of what he called severe, debilitating pain from a broken back and years of frustration navigating America's health insurance system, he learned that UnitedHealthcare was about to hold its annual investor conference in New York City. So he emailed the company directly, posing as a prospective investor claiming to manage more than $50 billion in assets. The company wrote back within the hour a response he pointedly told the court that came
2 days ago. And I thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit. But from what the judge saw as far as his demeanor goes, she did think that he was of sound mind. It was interesting, Anjanette, too, to see him kind of, again, talk about the crime where he was reading from a script. So it wasn't a situation where he was speaking with a lot of emotion. He was just kind of reading it as if it was maybe an essay in college, that type of sort, but just very kind of, like I had mentioned before, just stoically talking about the crime. He stayed seated the entire time. He took pauses as he's reading this out, but he goes into after how years of enduring pain in his back, that he was just getting frustrated with the entire healthcare system. And so he knew that UnitedHealthcare was holding an investor conference. And one thing I found very eye-opening was that he posed as an investor with the firm, saying that he had $50 billion worth of money to invest. And he made this kind of quip, Anjanette, about how they were quick to respond to him with the information that he would need in order to track down where this investor conference
faster than anything he had ever gotten out of an actual insurance company about his own medical claims. With the conference location confirmed, Mangione admitted he built parts of a firearm on a 3D printer, then traveled to New York carrying that weapon, a homemade silencer, and a loaded magazine with what he flatly called the intent to shoot Brian Thompson. Investigators say the shell casings recovered at the scene were stamped with the words delay, deny, and depose, language widely associated with how insurers are accused of avoiding claims. Mangione closed his statement in a plain, rehearsed monotone, I shot Mr. Thompson in Manhattan and he
died.
died.
That's been what we've been hearing as far as his motivation behind it, that he had been enduring years of pain and things of that sort. So he had posed as an investor. He received that immediate response, made a gun from a 3D printer, traveled to New York City, and he said that he had intentions to shoot Brian Thompson. He admitted that plain out in court, and that was kind of the moment we started to see his wife get a little emotional. His family is kind of looking at him as he's reading this, and you can't help but think that they have to feel this type of anger, possibly this hatred, as he's just callously talking about the crime. And so in terms of just his speech, it didn't take too long. He really just stopped after the shooting, and then it just ended from there.
Elizabeth, Luigi Mangione, in a direct quote from the courtroom, wrapped up his statement by saying, "I knew what I was doing." So he made it very clear that this was premeditated, that he made the ghost gun, the 3D gun. He made it himself, that he communicated by email with the investor relations department at UnitedHealthcare. So that was a key part.
I knew what I was doing was illegal. No excuses, no qualifiers, no visible emotion, just a flat admission read almost like a school assignment. It was Thompson's family who could not hide theirs. As Mangione described killing her husband in that same detached tone, Paulette Thompson was seen wiping away tears.
That he traveled through interstate commerce, across state lines, that he stalked Brian Thompson, and then was responsible for his death. You mentioned that Brian Thompson's family was in the courtroom. Talk to me about what you observed from Brian Thompson's family.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first came into the courtroom, us being the media, we all came in first. And then as we're getting closer to the hearing time, it was set for 11 a.m. Eastern time. We see this family come in. And at first we're all whispering to each other. We're like, is that Brian Thompson's family? Is that the family? Then we got confirmation it was the family, because we did see Brian Thompson's wife inside that courtroom, or excuse me, Brian Thompson's widow inside that courtroom. So it was pretty interesting to kind of see how their reaction was to seeing Luigi Mangione inside the courtroom too. He's in a khaki jumpsuit. The minute he comes into the courtroom, I see one of the family members kind of grab another family member, kind of like holding them a little bit tight on the shoulder. And I don't know if it was just the anticipation of seeing Brian Thompson's now confessed killer inside that courtroom, or what it was. But even in terms of when Luigi Mangione was speaking about the crime itself, we saw Brian Thompson's widow start to dry away some tears that were coming. I can only imagine how emotional it was to just hear him talk about it just so stoically in a way. But for the most part, there wasn't an outward kind of emotion expressed, but more so you could feel that all the family was very tight knit together. It was probably very jarring for them to see Luigi Mangione in the flesh. But for
with
some
relatives on either side reaching out to steady her. But hers were not the only tears in that courtroom. Scattered through the gallery sat a cluster of Mangione's most devoted supporters, several of them crying too, not out of guilt, but heartbreak for a man a corner of the internet has spent nearly 2 years turning into a folk hero. One supporter told reporters outside that the plea changed nothing for her, insisting she had always believed this was possible.
Not as many as you would expect, and it might also be because that this hearing was very last minute. We just heard about it just a few days ago. We all had to scramble to get here, even media-wise, so I'm sure some of his supporters who were, maybe outside of the state or had to travel from a distance, that they weren't able to be here today. But it was interesting because I was overhearing one of his main supporters who was inside that courtroom kind of talk about how this was always a possibility, how she knew that this could be a huge possibility even when he was first accused of these crimes. But it is interesting to see some people, even after the allocution, still say and still believe that Luigi Mangione is innocent, even after he spoke out in court, where we've seen other defendants who choose not to speak during allocutions. But Luigi said today in court that he did it, and again, we have to wait to see what that ultimate punishment will be. But he said out in court today that he was the guy that did it.
And there are a lot of people for whom Luigi Mangione is a hero, is a Robin Hood type figure. But then on the other side of the courtroom, we, of course, have the government saying that they will pursue life in prison without parole for Luigi Mangione. There was a press conference, and we're going to get to that very shortly and play that for the viewers,